Should I kill myself?
Do you always begin conversations this way?
Yes, I do.
For absurdist philosopher Albert Camus, and probably everyone else on the planet, this is the most important question ever. It's a rhetorically dramatic way of asking, what's the point? Why am I here? Is life really worth living? All good questions, and we're creatures of action. So if we can't find any good answers, are we best off replying to Camus in the affirmative? Well, before any of us go necking ourselves, we should probably consider why anyone would ask these types of questions in the first place. Maybe this hypothetical person is dissatisfied with their life, or just bored. There could be any number of reasons, but for now, we're going to focus on two major things. Number one, life is suffering. If it felt like I was getting my dick sucked every 2 seconds, I probably wouldn't feel so strongly about pursuing this line of inquiry. But I often find myself on the wrong side of this type of transaction. Yes, life has its ups and downs. I want to know if it's worth the trouble. It'd be nice if the pain that I experience could be justified somehow, if it was meaningful in some way. I think we all want to reduce suffering where possible, and we want to know if there's a good answer for why we experience it. Number two, life is confusing, and it's getting more so by the day. Information is proliferating exponentially. We find ourselves paralyzed by the paradox of choice, not to mention that there are already more variables than we know what to do within the observable universe. If we pondered every single one, every time we made a decision, we'd never make it out of bed in the morning. Life is a limited resource, so for our purposes, expediency generally trumps anal retentive precision. Basically, we want to know what we should do with ourselves before we die. Traditionally, we address these two problems with myth, religion, and other spiritual paths. These stories and rituals helped us to simplify the playing field. Their explanations of the world generally reduce confusion because they set up a framework specifying what was important, allowing us to disregard superfluous information and get on with our lives. They also implied that our existence was intentional, which is comforting. Life wasn't just a random accident. We were here for a specific purpose that had cosmic implications. This old paradigm also made sense of life's suffering. It's all a part of God's plan, we were told, or some such thing. This is a test of faith. After we die, all will be set to rights at the judgment seat of God, or in other tellings, when we awaken to our true nature and escape samsara. By today's standards, it's hard to make the argument that these old stories were literally true. But going by their track record, they're still powerfully motivating ideas. Most people who ever lived had some kind of enchanted view of the world, which tells us that quote-unquote good answers to our questions have as much to do with psychological and emotional resonance as they do with absolute truth. This highlights an age-old struggle between facts and values. What we want and what actually is aren't necessarily the same thing. We've tried out many different ideas over time. We started off with magic, moved on to religion, sprinkled in bouts of philosophy, and settled on a scientific and secular worldview. We moved on because many of the old systems couldn't substantiate their claims. My own intellectual trajectory vaguely follows this path. I think it's important to lay out my biases from the very beginning. I was born into a Mormon family and grew up believing practically all of its teachings. I've since lapsed in my faith and divorced all my wives, but the desire for there to be some kind of cosmic purpose baked into the universe, like good conquering evil, and or myself living forever in eternal bliss, has never really left me. I keep searching, just in case I stumble over some random rock that reveals a heretofore unknown, transcendental truth. A man can dream, can't he? As I go about this journey, I've decided to write a book about the meaning of life. Not that I really believe that there is one anymore. The notion seems quaint, ridiculous even, when exposed to the cold, harsh light of reason and rationality. Still, I think it's the most fascinating question in the world. Why do people do what they do? There are plenty of options available, and it's obvious that we can't do everything. But we can and will do something. We're creatures of action. Whatever we settle on, we must surely believe is the best possible choice given our limited knowledge in that moment. We'll be exploring the relationship between beliefs and action in many videos to come, and the book too, I'm sure. Please like and subscribe. For better or worse, we find ourselves right now in the midst of secular late capitalism. Let's call it materialism, just to keep things simple. Materialism rests on two great pillars, science and money. Our point of interest is whether these two provide the kind of meaning that humanity collectively seems to crave. The primary metric being, and we'll appeal again to Camus here, is whether or not a given paradigm is life-affirming. This comes down to a simple logical statement. If life is worth living, carry on. Else if life isn't worth living, kill yourself. Let's see what side materialism comes down on. To every man is given the key to the gates of heaven. The same key opens the gates to hell, said renowned physicist Richard Feynman. In modern times, science is that key, and it's been entrusted to humans. This has led to ever-improving technology, which has done wonders for our collective health and prosperity. But this situation, like all scientific ideas, is only ever provisional at best. Our increased ability to affect the planet, unfortunately, wasn't accompanied by a corresponding leap in wisdom. Hence, the imminent fate of the world essentially rests in the capable hands of a merry band of ultra-violent marauding monkeys, aka us. We now have the power to destroy almost all life on Earth, whether through thermonuclear war, environmental degradation, runaway artificial intelligence, or some other as yet unknown man-made threat. All courtesy of science. It's sad to think that the crowning achievement of civilization could be our complete and utter self-destruction. Perhaps Camus was onto something after all. Existential threats aside, science has done little to ease the general anxiety of everyday life. It has facts and logic on its side, but its account of creation is not nearly as exciting as some of the alternatives. Essentially, we live in an accidental universe. We happen by mistake. If life is suffering, then perhaps the best that we can aspire to be are masochists and sadists, if we attempt to prolong the pain of our existence by seeking survival. The bleakness of this outlook is not lost on our good friend Camus. He believed that we're the punchline of a terrible cosmic joke. We cry to the heavens for answers, and they remain silent. Thus we bear the heavy burden of wanting the universe to have an inherent meaning when it demonstrably doesn't. As such, science doesn't provide much of a life path or any direction, moral or otherwise. We're left to our own devices, which is both liberating and terrifying at the same time. Ultimately, though, this worldview, as far as meaning goes, can be summed up by this quote from existentialist Jean-Paul Sartre. Every existing thing is born without reason, prolongs itself out of weakness, and dies by chance. Now, this isn't to say that science hasn't offered us benefits, but to acknowledge that progress comes at a price. Ignorance may be bliss, but that's only because once the truth sets you free, you may find yourself feeling nostalgic for your lost chains. Regardless, Pandora's box has been opened. The toothpaste is out of the tube, as they say. There's no going back to our past beliefs, which probably wouldn't be desirable anyway. We need modern solutions to deal with modern problems, but we can't afford to be complacent. Continuing with business as usual will only exacerbate the difficulties that we are already facing. The business that I'm alluding to is the second great pillar of materialism, the one make-believe story that we can all get behind. I'm talking about money. It's what makes the world go around. It's also what might bring everything to a screeching halt. Science can't take all the credit for our troubles. Economics has a lot to answer for as well. I'm not here to make the claim that money's all bad, just that our financial system is broken. An in-depth review is beyond the scope of this video, so we'll just briefly touch on a few of the highlights. Here are just a few of the unflattering accusations that have been leveled at money. It creates artificial competition and scarcity. It alienates us from our work, from nature, and from ourselves. It incentivizes us to destroy the planet. The love of it is the root of all evil, etc. We'll explore the veracity of some of these claims over time, But for now, we'll continue with the theme of this video and decide whether having money makes for a satisfactory meaning of life and whether or not it's ultimately life-affirming. If we use depression as a measure, then money doesn't seem to be delivering on the modern promise of material prosperity being equivalent to happiness. Richer countries on average are more depressed than poorer ones. That's an actual statistic, and there are probably many ways to unpack it. But as a cursory marker, it doesn't exactly come across as a ringing endorsement for money. Still, as has been said many times, capitalism is the worst economic system, except for all the others that we've tried. It's not a totally faulty product. We've got some good use out of it, but it might be time to experiment with some new ideas. The primary reason we need to abandon ship is that capitalism as presently constituted is unsustainable. It requires infinite growth on a finite planet, an obvious impossibility. We can continue to steer headlong into disaster, or we can change direction. Doing so at a systemic level, however, is much easier said than done. In the end, like all civilizations that have gone before us, we have a central story that informs our decisions. These stories generally have given us the courage to face the difficulties of life head-on, independent of how true they actually were. Their most important attribute, judging by the fact that we're still here, was that they were life-affirming. We're creatures of action, and our actions reveal our beliefs. As I've mentioned, we're dealing with a simple logical problem. If life is worth living, carry on. Else if life is not worth living, end it. Consciously or not, we seem to have collectively cast our vote on Camus' suicide referendum. The exit polls indicate that yes, we should kill ourselves, and we've set up a number of contingency plans to ensure that we get the job done. Materialism doesn't provide much in the way of meaning, and perhaps that's why it's leading us toward a destructive end. Whatever the underlying motive, there's no doubt that we need to change something. I echo Isaac Asimov's sentiment. Call it idealism. Call it an identification of myself with that mystical generalization to which we refer by the term man. I want us to survive. So, can we come up with a better story than materialism and keep our story going? That's what I want to find out. And that's what we'll be looking at on this channel. Let's hope the answer is yes. Until next time, be excellent to each other and party on, dudes.